Okay. You ready? Let's do this. You're listening to Explore Magazine's Live the Adventure podcast. This is the podcast that delves deep into the outdoors, will inspire, inform, and get you stoked to explore. And I'm your host, David Webb. Welcome to episode 29 of Explore Magazine's Live the Adventure podcast. I'm your host, David Webb. When you go outside, what concerns you? Getting lost? Falling off a cliff? A cougar? A bear? Sure, but what about something small? Like so small you can barely see it, and you probably won't even feel it. But it is a concern for anyone who plays outdoors. I'm talking about ticks, and more specifically, the pathogens that a tick can transmit to the human body. Now don't freak out, we still want to go outdoors, but we need to arm ourselves with knowledge so we can stay tick safe. Today, my guest is Sarah Cormode from the Canadian Lyme Disease Foundation. Sarah is a podcaster, and she has had the opportunity to interview dozens and dozens of experts about ticks and Lyme disease and outdoor safety. And today, she's going to educate us. Sarah Cormode, welcome to Explore Magazine's Live the Adventure podcast. I'm really happy to have you join us. How are you doing today?
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm so delighted to be here and chatting with you and your audience.
Awesome. Can you take a minute just to let our audience know who you are and who you're representing today?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I know your audience is a whole bunch of people that love to adventure and play in the outdoors, and so that is who I am. I've spent my entire life living and playing in the outdoors. In my 20s and 30s, I tree planted in Northern Ontario. I did a lot of guiding. So I guided sea kayaking out on Passamaquoddy Bay.
Oh, wow.
Near the Bay of Fundy in New Brunswick. And we guided whitewater rafting on the Ottawa River and on the Thompson in BC and even down in the Grand Canyon, which was super fun. And basically, I just love to play. I love to ski powder. I love to mountain bike, sail. So I love all the outdoor habitats. And the reason I got invited on here today was to talk to you about a podcast that I host for the Canadian Lyme Disease Foundation and just tell you a little bit about what we do to raise awareness and help keep people safe when they're playing in the outdoors.
Nice. So what is the Canadian Lyme Disease Foundation?
Yeah, good question. So it's a nonprofit organization that's been around it's around 20 years. I think that might be next year, the celebration. They're a national organization. It's volunteer-based and really formed to help patients to reduce misdiagnosis and get better treatment in Canada. And CanLyme also works with researchers and, they promote effective diagnosis and treatment. So lots of the medical stuff that happens, as well as funding research. And the main thing I'm involved in is promoting public awareness, which we do through our podcast. I feel so privileged I get to speak with amazing doctors and scientists from around the world and people doing things like wilderness first aid training, which is something that this is something we need to make sure we're learning about so we're prepared when we're going out to play.
Absolutely. So, obviously your background and personal interests are outdoor recreation, fun outside. You get involved in this, and how did the podcast come to be?
Well, sometimes I learn through the school of hard knocks, and this is one of those situations. So back in 2012, I was having a bonfire in my backyard in Victoria, British Columbia, and I was bitten by a very tiny, tiny little tick on the back of my head, which, ticks crawl and they love to crawl to warm places. So it was just inside my hairline, which is a pretty normal place for them to hide out. And over the course of the next 2 weeks, I just became super, super sick. And it was like nobody could figure out what was wrong with me. And it was probably a year later, by which point I was very sick and unable to work. And I ended up going down to the States for diagnosis and treatment. So really, I've learned about it the hard way. Eventually, I met Jim Wilson, who was the founder and president of CanLyme, or the Canadian Lyme Disease Foundation. And so I've just been working with them. And when the crazy times began a few years ago, we were supposed to be doing conferences throughout British Columbia. And then I was working with a journalist named Bob Keating, and he's the one who taught me, and he's the one who came up with the idea and said, we need to do a podcast and you need to be the host, Sarah. And I actually really resisted it at the beginning because I didn't like the idea of sharing my suffering with a bunch of people I didn't know. But, eventually you're like, hey, if I can help somebody else not go through this experience I've had, that would be amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's really interesting. Circling back a minute, what is Lyme disease?
Yeah, it's a good question. So Lyme disease is a bacteria. It's a bacterial infection, and it's caused by a bacteria that's called Borrelia burgdorferi, just to get all technical for people. But the thing about Lyme, that's the disease most people hear about, but ticks carry all kinds of different pathogens. And, some of the ones that we might see in Canada or in North America are oh my gosh, I can't even say it, anaplasmosis, babesiosis, rickettsia. So they can carry a lot of diseases. And in fact, that's part of what makes it such a complicated disease to diagnose and treat, because sometimes Lyme disease might be the best thing you have, and you might have something that's even harder to treat. And there's lots of information on our website about that. So you can learn from the experts, because what I am not is I'm not a doctor and I'm not the scientist. But that's why it's so great to hear from, the leading experts from around the world to learn from.
Yeah.
And really, there's not many places in the world that you can go where ticks, where it's not tick habitat, unless I think Antarctica is the only one.
Really? So throughout Canada, is there a northern range for them? Is there a spot you can go up north, or where are they? Where are these ticks?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And so some of the research we have funded, we work with an organization called Genetics, which is with a GN, Genetics, TICKS. Yeah. So Justin Wood founded that. He also has gone through the experience of Lyme disease. And he's created this awesome resource. So when people submit ticks, it's not surveillance that, governments might do, for example. But when people submit ticks, if they agree to share that data, Genetics has created a statistics map, and you can go on there and I think it's really cool because you can see where ticks have been collected from people, from pets, from horses, from wildlife. And when they submit those for testing, they can be tested for not just Lyme disease, but these other pathogens as well. And the good thing about it is you can see that not all ticks carry Lyme disease or other pathogens. So when you go on there, you'll see little green dots, and those are the ticks that have been found that were tested and weren't carrying any diseases. And then you can also see the red ones, and you can click on those and you can see where they were found, what kind of animal they were removed from, whether they were engorged or not. Because just because you find a tick crawling on you, I mean, if you find one crawling on you, that's good news, because it hasn't bitten you yet. And when they bite you, they'll be there for a while.
Yeah, so is that to say then you can use that information to find out where disease-carrying ticks are more common? Is that the hope there?
Yeah, we've been collecting that data for 3 years, so it's relatively new, and it's only as robust as the number of ticks that get submitted. So, but I guess the other thing just to be mindful of is, we talk about animal vectors. So vectors are animals that might also be getting fed on by ticks, like mice or deer, other rodents, birds. So a lot of people don't think about birds, but migratory birds are like airplanes for ticks. So anywhere along migratory bird routes, that's where you'll see a lot more ticks. And again, if you look at the genetics map, you'll see along the waterways, that's where most of the ticks are being submitted from. Yeah, so it's all about the habitat.
Yeah.
And it's also about how they're moving around. And then once migratory birds, drop those ticks in those areas, then it gets into those vector populations of the deer and the mice. But, poor deer I remember I went through a period of being really not liking deer very much and blaming it on the deer, because I'd probably picked up the tick crawling through a deer trail. But then I'm like, that's not really fair. There's all kinds of animals that get tick bites and get diseases, right, from them. So
it's interesting. So you had an experience with it. The founder of Genetics, maybe other people, you've probably spoken to a lot of people. Is it becoming more prevalent? Or are we diagnosing it more, or both?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm trying to think of who I interviewed that would be the best person to answer that one. But I mean, it's definitely increasing for sure. In Canada, I think in the last 5 years, the number of cases in Canada have doubled. But I don't think we're doing a great job of diagnosing in Canada. So I'm not sure those numbers are the best. I think in the States, they're estimating about 500,000 new cases a
Oh
year.
my
And that's
gosh.
obviously a bigger population than
Yeah.
Canada, but those
Still.
are very significant numbers.
And are
Hmm.
the states ahead of us in diagnosis, or what, or do they have more information? You know what?
I don't know. I mean, our
Yeah.
medical systems are so different,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so we won't get into that too much, but or at all. And but what is existent in the States is they have a lot of doctors that are trained as that are Lyme literate doctors, whether they're medical doctors, functional medicine doctors, naturopathic doctors. There's a lot more people that seem to be treating it in the States, and I'm not sure if that's because of regulatory stuff. And in Canada, Can Lyme has been supporting grants for healthcare professionals for the last 3 years. So if anybody wants to, again, we'll provide you links for your show notes, but there's a great organization in the States called the International Lyme and Associated Diseases Society. And they offer conferences and online training. And so we've been providing grants to try to increase the number of Lyme literate healthcare professionals in Canada. And that could be, pharmacists, nurses, like it doesn't just have to be doctors, anyone that's just involved in that, even that screening process that could say, hey, you should maybe get tested for this. Like, have you considered this as a possible illness? Because most people don't ever remember being bitten by a tick. Probably, I think they say about 50% of the people remember having a tick bite. I'm one of the few, but a lot of people don't ever remember being bitten by a tick. So, yeah, if you do find a tick on you, you're kind of lucky because you have this one chance where you can. I'll tell you a little bit about tick behavior, maybe is they don't jump, they don't fly, so they can't land down on trees. So as outdoor adventurers, we just need to be mindful of the habitats that we're in. And I definitely don't do as much bushwhacking as I once did. I stick to trails more. Or if I am in habitats like when I was tree planting, again, that far north, they're not seeing too many ticks. And I did just interview someone about that as well. Um, but you want to make sure you're doing tick checks when you get back from work or playing, or even if you're camping, because what they like to do is hang out at the end of long grass, and they just wait there until a nice warm-blooded mammal walks by, and they got a good whiff of your carbon dioxide, which is what they're very good at sensing, and they just latch onto you, and then they'll crawl, and you can't really feel them crawling on you.
And did you feel it bite you?
No, I didn't. So this is what they do. They'll find a warm spot. So for example, if you're doing wilderness first aid, they'll probably teach you about checking for hot spots.
Mm-hmm.
And so hot spots on our body are, our armpits, our groins, behind our knees is popular with children, under breasts for women, and definitely your head, which is putting out all this heat. They love to crawl up into your hairline. Even like they found one on a child's eyebrow. So I mean, just a place where they can hide out because they don't typically bite you and leave. They first thing they do is inject you with something so that you actually can't feel them biting you, and they're usually
Mm.
there for a couple days, 2 to 3 days,
Okay.
having a feast so they can make babies, and that's what their life cycle is. So if you can just be mindful of, were you in heavy brush? Maybe you want to, you can even check the genetics map ahead of time,
Mm-hmm.
see if there's any positive ticks that are being found in that area. But, we don't want people to be scared. We want people to be prepared and know what to do,
Yeah.
because the worst thing is to find something. And I'll tell you, I'd never had anyone look at that tick bite because it felt like a pimple to me. It was so small.
Mm-hmm.
And this time of year is sort of the time where the baby ticks, which are called nymph,
Mm-hmm.
they're the ones that are out in the springtime, and they're the ones that are a lot harder to find. And if you ever do find a tick on yourself, make sure you do a really thorough check of your entire body, because if you find one, you might find another one on your body or on your child's body or on your pet.
And so then what? You find a tick. Then what do you do?
Yeah, good point. So you find it and you stay calm, just like when we were rafting, you fall out
Mm-hmm.
into the white water, you just go, okay, stay calm, stay calm, stay calm. I know what to do in this situation. Um, Can Lyme does sell tick removal kits, and I really think that's something that's essential to have in all first aid kits in your vehicle. And in there, they've got little fine tip tweezers. And when you remove the tick, you want to remove it from its mouth parts. You don't want to
Okay.
squeeze its abdomen. So we try to like educate people about myths from the past. In the past, people would burn them with cigarettes or squeeze their
Yikes.
abdomen as they're removing them. But you really want to make sure you grab them by their mouth part and just gently pull them out. And if you are removing a tick, like actually we just removed one from my friend's horse the other day. And what happens sometimes is people drop the tick and then they can't test the tick. So try to remove it somewhere where you don't drop it, or if you do drop it, you're going to be able to find it, because then you can keep that tick and put it in a little container and you can ship it off to genetics. In Canada is a great lab because when they get your tick, they'll have your results within a couple days. And in the States, if you have any listeners in the States, there's a great resource there called Tick Report. I'm pretty sure it's .com. And Tick Report is, I believe, at Amherst University, and they do the same service. So they'll test the tick and tell you what the tick is carrying. And until we have better testing for like blood testing for humans, it is like the one chance you have is to test that tick and see what it's carrying to find out if you may be exposed to that.
Okay, so you get bitten by a tick, you pull it, you test it, it tests positive for Lyme disease. Then what?
Yeah, so one thing that is agreed upon, I mean, this is where the controversy gets going a little more. But one thing that people don't argue about is that early treatment of Lyme disease is very effective. And so typically they treat with doxycycline antibiotic. And again, if you're doing a wilderness trip, you might want to talk to your doctor and be prepared to have that.
So early as in like, as you know, if you're out in the backwoods, say you're out for a week, you get bitten on day 2, maybe take some? Is that what you're kind of getting at? Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, there's some people that did do that. There used to be a really good company doing that work in Ontario, but I think they've shut down. But you'd be able to call like these, this couple was canoeing in Northern Ontario and they got a tick bite. They had doxycycline with them. They called the doctor prescribed it over the phone, and they were able to start on a course of antibiotics right away.
So before they even knew, they just knew they got a solid
they knew they
tick
had
bite.
an engorged tick. They had like they removed the tick from their body.
Engorged tick, yeah, really interesting. Oh gosh, so
I mean, early treatment is the thing that they agree about, is that it's effective and doxycycline works very well. And then if it doesn't get treated though, it can really turn into more severe symptoms. And as time goes on, if you're not treated, your symptoms do get worse. So I'll just talk a little bit about my own experience, because that's what I know for myself. When I was first bitten, the first thing that started happening for me is I became really sensitive to sound and light. So I had neurological Lyme. That's what happened. I was bitten in the head. So I developed neurological symptoms. So my eyesight, super sensitive to sound. I was like on the couch in the dark. And then I developed like crazy headaches, and I had crazy headaches every day, all day for like 6 years. So it was awful.
And so how long did this start happening? Like you got bit. Do you remember the duration before you started to notice anything?
Yeah, within a week I had symptoms. Wow. I don't remember if I had, a lot of people might get flu-like symptoms. So if it's summertime and you're getting flu-like symptoms, that could be an indicator. Yeah. So, and again, we've got all kinds of really great doctors that we've interviewed on the podcast that'll speak way more in depth about this. So I would encourage listeners to go there if that's something they're interested in. And then eventually down the road, I just interviewed a great doctor, Dr. Brian Fallon from Columbia University. And he was telling me he's a psychiatrist, and he's been studying psychiatric patients and treating them for Lyme and watching their symptoms go away. So that's a very fascinating interview.
Wow.
And he's really leading edge looking at the way that these kind of infections can affect neurological symptoms and mental health.
Isn't that fascinating?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Another symptom people might get is arthritis, even in animals, like in pets and dogs, horses. The thing about arthritis with Lyme is that it doesn't usually stay in one place. So if you have arthritis in your elbow and then it moves to your knee, If it's a migrating arthritis, that might also be an indication. And so you might notice that with pets as well.
Yeah, the symptoms, I do have, not firsthand, but, I some secondhand experience with this disease in my family. And I'm looking at the symptoms. I went on the canlyme.com website, and I was looking at the symptoms before this interview started. And the thing that really got me is, just, I'm going to hit just a couple of the symptoms here. And you look at dental problems, okay? Oversensitivity to light, that's what you said. Buzzing in ears, constipation, endocarditis, increased motion sickness, unusual depression. I'm just listing a few of them. Stammering speech, loss of sex drive, phantom smells. And then the one that really stuck out to me is symptoms seem to change or come and go. So that one jumped out at me because I'm like, okay, how do you figure this out then? If the symptoms are changing and coming and going, and people have to go on this canlyme.com website and look at the symptoms because, my goodness, some of these could be anything. If you're out there, you're an outdoors person or anyone else who's at risk, and we'll talk about that in a minute too. If stuff comes up that you can't explain, should you start looking at Lyme disease?
Yeah, well, I would certainly consider it for sure. The challenge is finding a Lyme literate doctor. The testing that is available is there's a whole interview I did with Dr. Armin Schwartzbach about testing. He's in Germany. So that's a good interview to listen to. But yeah, that one about it coming and going, people that have been treated for Lyme and who have eventually gotten better, that's one of the hardest things about it. As you're getting treated, the bacteria grows, and I think it's a 3-week cycle. So that's part of the reason that it gets worse and gets better. But yeah, when you're having those really bad days, you're just in so much pain. And I started just keeping a pain journal and tracking my level of pain so that I could see that every day wasn't a 10 out of 10. And that eventually over time with my treatment, I could see that, okay, now that month there was an 8 out of 10. And that's still a lot of pain, but it was a lot better than a 10 out of 10.
Looking at all these symptoms, how dangerous is this disease?
Yeah, well, that's a really good point. If it goes untreated, it is certainly life-threatening. And another thing Dr. Brian Fallon spoke about is that incidence of suicide is much higher for chronic patients. But that's also the reason to get treated early. And I really am very hopeful with the research that is happening all around the world that it's bringing together all kinds of people who are having really healthy debates, and it's going to require very different opinions and discussion to get us to the solution of this problem. But I feel like solving the problem will also help solve many other illnesses in the world as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So what is the debate though?
Oh, the debate's just around treatment. Some organizations or doctors with heavy duty antibiotics, which I did take for 2 years. I took a lot of antibiotics, but there's lots of people also treating with herbal medicine. And, there's so many different things that people are doing, and there's so many different stories of people getting sick, but there's even more stories of people getting better in different ways. So I try not to judge anyone for whatever it is that they're trying at that time, and just hope that people recover. But typically the debate is around using antibiotics long term. That's the debate in the medical community.
Whether or not it's effective or whether or not it's, I can imagine there are some other risks to using antibiotics long term.
Yeah. And I guess sometimes that's the problem is that, maybe you are dealing with a bacterial infection, but you're also missing these other co-infections that the tick may have also injected into you. They can carry a lot of pathogens. And so you might need to treat with an antifungal or an antiviral. And maybe, if you're not trained in understanding those nuances, you might be missing something.
Nasty little creatures for us, aren't they? Who's the most at risk for this? I know from in the outdoor industry, we talk about a lot, canoeists, paddlers, multi-night backpackers, and like you said, people who are in the habitat at the prime times. But, you're on the CanLyme website, and it's certainly not focused to outdoor recreationalists. So I just wonder, how do you know you're at risk?
Well, I mean, if you're in the outdoors, like even gardeners, right? Gardeners are at risk. If you're in the outdoors, it's a possibility. So another interview we did recently was with Atlantic, TICK, I think they're .ca. But Lisa Learning started that company. She founded it. And, her children both got Lyme disease. She started because children are typically more at risk because they're out there rolling in the grass and playing around and having fun. And that's what we want everyone to do. So there are preventative things you can do. There's like they make a natural insect repellent that they use safely on pets, on children. You can put on your clothing, but you can also put on your skin. There's other ones like, DEET is what we used to smother ourselves with when we were tree planting, but it's not something I want to recommend.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thinking about what we've talked about, awareness, education, prevention.
Mm-hmm.
So you said everyone who's outdoors is in at least somewhat at risk. So, I mean, that's everyone. So how do you prevent this? What are your courses of action here?
Yeah, be mindful of the habitat that you're in and really like check for ticks, like get in the routine of doing a tick check. The tree planter, Tim Chida, who I interviewed, who had a tree planting company, I loved it because, those are people working in the outdoors and they had partners. They'd buddy up and they would check for ticks, after work. And, it's good to get into that routine of checking, especially if you're in the habitat like that. When I'm hiking and stuff, I'll stay on the trails. I won't be bushwhacking as much, but my dog's off in the bush. So, when I come home, I check my dog for ticks too. And, I don't do it every day. But certainly if I'm out, out playing in the outdoors, I'm trying to think. Even last week I was somewhere and I was like, it just feels a little like lots of long grass. I'm just going to check myself, check my dog. Oh, that was the day we found the tick on my friend's horse. I was like, okay, gross. I'm going to check myself. I'm going to check my dog. And, and I don't just check that day. I check the next day too, because, it's easier to find a tick that's engorged and has had a feed.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So you'd mentioned the horse before, and you mentioned checking the dog. So this is a risk to dogs.
Yeah, all animals. Pets. Yeah, for sure.
All.
Yeah, and
really?
It's a risk to us, especially, just being mindful of the time of year. So right now in the springtime is the chances, especially of the small, tiny ticks coming in. So, try to keep your dogs off the furniture, try to keep your dogs off the bed that time of year maybe.
Oh, right. So they can bring them into your house is what you're saying. You could get bitten indoors by a tick.
Absolutely. And in fact, that's we've heard from a lot of veterinarians and pet groomers that's happened too, because they're interacting with animals all the time. And so it's actually like an occupational hazard for them.
And circling back to the kids being at risk, I totally get that. Obviously, they're mucking about. It must, if it's challenging to diagnose in an adult, how do we do it in a kid? Especially a young kid who might not be able to articulate exactly what's going wrong.
Oh, you got it right there. Children and animals have a hard time articulating that stuff. Exactly. Mm-hmm. One of the first podcasts I did was with my dad. He's retired now, but Dr. Ted Cormode is a pediatrician. He practiced in Orillia, Ontario for about 40 years. And my dad really got involved in once I was sick, he got involved with Canadian Lyme Disease Foundation, and he helped children that had become very sick. And there was a case, I remember somewhere on the West Coast, and a young boy had been, they didn't know he'd been bitten. They just knew he was really sick. And then I think they ended up taking his tonsils out, and he was put on antibiotics for the tonsil operation. And he got so much better while he was on those antibiotics. And then when the antibiotics ended, he got really sick again. And the mother was aware and curious, and she noticed that, and that was when she suspected Lyme might be the case. So my dad ended up supporting that family, and he did get diagnosed and he did get treated, and he's totally healthy now. But it's sometimes just looking out that way, especially for children, to notice changes in behavior.
Here at Explore Magazine's podcast and everything, we have a core purpose of inspiring outdoor experiences. And so talking about this, how do you avoid abject terror? I mean, this is like terrifying me,
I know. I know.
It's crazy. I mean, what do we do about this?
Yeah, remember that it's really easy to treat early on. So having that awareness, so doing the prevention is really important. Being educated is really important about it so that you're not scared. You don't need to be scared. Like when we found the tick on the horse the other day, I was like, here, let me show you what to do. I'm not worried about it. I know exactly what to do. I know exactly where to send the tick. I got an email today saying that they've received it and they're going to be testing it. So I know what to do. I'm not scared that way. I did go through a period for sure where I was a little nervous going back into the wilderness, but I still do that. And, I guess in tick season, because I live on Vancouver Island, I take my dog down to the beach. I walk her at the beach. There's not ticks on the salty beach. They don't have that habitat. So you kind of move around, you don't have to worry in the snow. There's no ticks. Go play in the snow, ski, have fun. But just be mindful that as soon as the weather goes up to 4 degrees, that's when ticks become active. So when you get those first snow melts, you're going to have ticks starting to move around. Check for ticks. If you find the tick, we say you're lucky and people are like,
no, I
what?
Get that. Yeah.
Gross. But you are lucky because you can test the tick and it's really your one chance to know what it was carrying. Until we get better blood testing for humans and animals, which I'm very confident we'll have that soon.
So 4 degrees Celsius, that's interesting because that means I'm in Vancouver, you're in Victoria. That means, do we have ticks all year then?
Yeah, in theory, but they're probably hiding out, in the leaf litter. And, I think back to when I was a kid and we would play in those leaf piles, and I would never do that now. When I see pictures of kids playing in leaves, it just gives me the heebie-jeebies. I get all itchy.
Gosh, you wonder how many of these cases have gone undiagnosed over the years. It must be staggering.
Or misdiagnosed, right? Like a lot of people are told, oh, you have, early onset Alzheimer's or early onset dementia, or you have, but did they ever treat with antibiotics? Like, so again, in my case, I had these crazy headaches and the light and sound sensitivity. That's how it started for me. I did get 10 days of antibiotic treatment of doxycycline because I told them, I was like, I had a tick bite me on the back of my head. And I was probably 50% better after 10 days of doxycycline. And then I got sick as soon as it ended. And I didn't know about Lyme disease then. I'd been told it didn't exist on Vancouver Island. So I was like, good thing. That sounds awful. I wouldn't want that. And then it took me a year with like then worsening symptoms and all that. But trying a little course of doxycycline isn't going to hurt you. And if you get better, interesting. And
it's a good diagnosis tool, I suppose. And it's interesting that you said about Vancouver Island, because I know, like, I'm actually from Vancouver Island originally. I often equated it to an Eastern disease, Ontario, Nova Scotia for a long time. And that's certainly proving not to be the case at all.
Yes, they definitely have a lot of cases in the Maritimes right now. But there's a lot of great people doing great work out there too. And I mean, that's what we like to do, is give a lot of hope to people that are sick at home, as well as people that are scared to go down that route. But honestly, you would notice I went from perfectly healthy 40-year-old woman to a very sick person within 2 weeks' time. So very dramatic.
We've talked about the diagnosis and the treatment, and you've mentioned Lyme literate healthcare professionals. I want to talk about that for a minute. Like Lyme literate, what does that mean, and why aren't they all Lyme literate? I don't know how else to say it.
Well, that is the golden question that I probably won't discuss my thoughts on, but I don't know why Canadian professionals are not coming out of school with that training. It's shocking to me, and I think it's very wrong personally. But, there are people that are curious or that have family members, and they've decided to go that route and learn about it and make changes. And, there are great people that you can go see in Canada as well as in other parts of the world, in the States and in Europe. A lot of people have gone for treatment, but that's not what we want, really. Like, I'm committed to helping people get treated within the Canadian public healthcare system. And hopefully we're there like sooner than later would be awesome. So yeah, Lyme literate doctors. Again, we offer Can Lyme offers healthcare grants for anyone working in the healthcare industry to go and learn. And I went 3 years ago to their conference, 3.5 years ago now, in Boston. And what I was so inspired about at that conference, like I'm an educator, that's my background, outdoor education, and I was just so inspired at the mixing of people that came to that were really solutions focused. And I think that's the way we're going to get through this, is having lots of different opinions, lots of healthy debates. And the curious doctors are the ones that come forward. And, that's the one thing I just notice. Everybody I interview, I ask them, what did you do? What brought you into this? And most people knew somebody and they just knew something wasn't right and they dug into it. And that's what drew them into working with people who are experiencing Lyme disease and other tick-borne illnesses.
Do you have specific resources at Can Lyme for healthcare professionals?
Yeah. So, well, for healthcare professionals, there's definitely a ton of information on the Can Lyme website, canlyme.com. And we're just updating that website. So that's changing and becoming a little more user friendly and more interactive. So there's a ton of research on there and published research. So people can definitely dig into that. Certainly through the podcast, looking at lyme.ca, we have lots of resources. And a couple of years we developed specifically, and I think it's so important for this time of year in our conversation about children, we've developed a whole program, an educator's resource that is ready for anyone. We actually linked it to the teaching outcomes for British Columbia, but it can really be easily adapted in any outdoor classroom. And so that's on our website too. And I'd encourage people to go through that. You don't have to be working at a camp or working in a school setting. You can just use that resource to teach yourself, and you'll learn the basics about how to identify a tick. Like, for example, ticks have 8 legs. So a lot of people will be, sending me pictures. Hey, Sarah, is this a tick? And no, there's only 6 legs. It's not a tick. I don't know what it is, but it's not a tick.
I suppose that's good. You don't have to know what it is. You just have to know if it's a tick, right?
Yeah. And it's usually the black-legged ticks. There's black-legged ticks. There's dog ticks, but it's mostly the black-legged ticks that we need to be worried about in Canada. And then down in the States, there's the Lone Star tick is something that sounds a little more aggressive. But
that's
but
a scary name.
Get an idea what they look like. Don't be scared of them. Don't stop going on your adventures. Just be prepared. And if you're going on an extended trip, try to get a dose of doxycycline ahead of time so that you can call somebody through telehealth and get them to prescribe it to you and monitor you. And then really monitor for symptoms is critical.
Super interesting. Yeah, that had never occurred to me. That's great advice. I mean, Can Lyme, it feels like so much is going on there. You have so many resources. You've got your podcast looking at Lyme. You mentioned you're not-for-profit. How does this all come together? How are you funded? Who's paying for all this?
Good question. Well, we did have a really amazing anonymous donor fund a lot of the work we've been doing over the last 3 years, but we typically rely on donations from families, from individuals, and then another way that we raise money is we do sell our own tick removal kits, and that's one way that Can Lyme raises their money. And then we are going to be hosting an event towards the end of May. I don't have the date yet, but it'll be posted on our website. And we're going to be screening an online, it'll be like an online fundraising event and a community screening of The Quiet Epidemic, which is a feature-length movie. It's an award-winning new US-based documentary about chronic Lyme disease. And so when people sign up for that, they can buy a ticket for themselves or as their family, and they can also buy one for someone who can't afford to buy a ticket. And then they have like a 7-day screening window where they can watch that movie. And I have not seen it yet, but I hear it's quite extraordinary. So that'll be coming up at the end of May. And that's another fundraising event.
And so in May, I believe, is Lyme Disease Awareness Month, correct?
Yes, indeed, it is. Yeah. So every year we're always trying to raise awareness. I mean, on the island and where you are on the coast of BC in Vancouver, I was bitten in February.
Mm-hmm.
So May's a little too late to be thinking about Lyme disease where we live, but May's a good time of year thinking about, the other provinces that are covered in more snow longer.
And even around here, more people are getting out, right? And rather than skiing, like you said, where it's not really going to happen, we're more in the tick habitat, even on the coast. So yeah, it's a good time.
So that's part of the reason we want to do the screening in May as a fundraiser and just raising awareness. And yeah, and again, we want people to be empowered with knowledge. We don't want people to be scared, and really doing your homework now, like planning any great adventure. That's one thing you should be prepared for. And great people teaching wilderness first aid where they're diving deeper into that as well. Like I did an interview with Doc Crawford from Wilderness First Aid. I can't remember the organization, but anyways, it's really cool, like hearing how he's breaking down myths and teaching outdoor professionals and guides so that they have that awareness as well now. And I think that's where we need to be at. I think we're at that stage where let's not learn the hard way. Let's be prepared so that when we find ticks, keep the tick, test the tick, and get early treatment, because everyone agrees that early treatment works.
That's good. That's good to have at least one thing that everyone's agreeing on. And yeah, no, I really appreciate what you're saying. It feels like empowering everyone. Our audience is primarily outdoor enthusiasts, but everyone to just be aware, to get that knowledge, to know, to check for ticks, to know how to do your, the best practices for avoiding a tick, and then knowing what to look for if something does come up. And I suppose that's what your podcast does. I've listened to several episodes, so that's a great source of information. That's looking at Lyme. You can link to it from the Can Lyme website. Yeah, where can we find some more information about any Can Lyme events or Can Lyme in general? What are your channels?
Oh, yeah. Good question. I don't have those written down. But yes, we're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. So you can follow us there. We always post new episodes on Twitter and Instagram. And somebody does something on Facebook, but it's not me. But yeah, please go to all those places. And, just like being prepared, like in the springtime, I'm a whitewater paddler. And I'm aware that in the springtime, I got to look out for strainers on the side of the river, and I need to know how to avoid them. And if I encounter them, I need to know how to deal with them. So just like preparing for a whitewater river trip, if you're going to be outside, just get yourself educated. It's not that hard. We've got great resources for you, and don't be scared. And if you end up having somebody on your trip or in your group that finds one, like, make sure you look out for each other, because sometimes, like in my case, I knew I wasn't well, but it's really important that we look out for our friends and our families so that if something's not quite right, we can help them find the best care possible and get them treated early.
That's great advice. That's really good advice. I love that. The idea that if someone in your circle, someone in your community is seeming a little off, maybe have a conversation. Maybe a lesson here is like, don't be shy. Don't be shy with the tick checks. If you can't see your, you think maybe like a tick, you want to get someone to check the back of you or maybe a sensitive part. Maybe don't be that shy. If something's not right, don't be shy. If you're not feeling well, don't be shy. Go out there and address this because, like you said, I mean, if you're getting it early, that's better.
Yeah, and there's plenty of places on our body we can't see. Like mine was right on the back of my head. You can't see it.
Lower back, something like that. I mean, like how often do you look at your lower back? Probably not that often, but is really great advice. And I'm sure anyone looking for more, canlyme.com, we'll post those links on our website. I'm feeling better. I was starting, the first part of our conversation, I was getting more scared. I've never really been scared of ticks. And I'm like, I think I need to be more scared, but I'm actually feeling better now. I think knowledge has that thing where you can get like a little bit and you're like, oh gosh, oh God, I'm never going outside again. And then you're like, okay, no, I need more. I need more knowledge, and now I can address this well. So I really appreciate your talk.
Exactly. And do you know that, people do get better. There's lots of people who've had Lyme disease that get better. So sometimes it takes longer, but there's lots of great people doing great work out there. And people are welcome to contact us through our website, and we will help you find a Lyme literate doctor.
That's great. And definitely everyone stay tuned to the website for that screening later this month.
Yeah, thank you. And don't be scared, have fun and stay safe when you work and play in the outdoors, and keep doing it and keep doing more.
Any final thoughts for our listeners?
there's lots to learn. And I guess the only other thing is if you do listen to our podcast, we've just put out a survey and we'd love to hear what people actually, if you have ideas of people you want us to interview, we'd love to hear those ideas. We love getting feedback from our listeners. So or if you have favorite episodes, like I have a couple, I'll just tell you really quickly.
Yeah,
like 2 of my favorite episodes, which are, because I really think the podcast is about healing. It's not all about Lyme disease. So if I had to do all this again, if I found myself really sick, one of the first things I would do is this program called the Dynamic Neural Retraining System, which was started by Annie Hopper. So a lot of people get limbic system impairment. And I'm not going to get into it, but I'm just going to say that is probably one of the best programs. And it costs like a few $100s. It doesn't cost $400,000 like what I paid for my healthcare over the years. That's a great place to start. The other episode I really love, personally, I just had a great connection about, is with Dr. Richard Tedeschi, and it's about post-traumatic growth. And it's about how to take traumatic events that we all go through in life, different times, different experiences, and how to make meaning out of it. And, for me, doing the podcast is certainly something that I have, taken a really crummy situation and tried to make it into something positive. And I just think there's some really good snippets in both of those that will help anyone that's struggling with anything right now. So
yeah, I'll definitely look out for that episode. I think that could have a lot of applications, and I appreciate you sharing that. All of our listeners, you like podcasts, definitely check out Looking at Lyme. Go over to canlyme.com and get educated so we can go outside and we can have those inspiring outdoor experiences, not be scared, and be safe.
Perfect. Stay safe in the outdoors. Thanks for the great interview, David.
The problem with knowledge is that when you get a little bit, it can increase your fear. When it comes to ticks, though, it's about getting as much knowledge as you can so you can mitigate risk. Understand when you may have a concern and then address it. That's what this episode was all about, and I hope you've come away feeling more confident about going outside, not more wary. Click over to canlyme.com, that's CANLYME.com, and you can connect to all the links we talked about, including the podcast and the screening for The Quiet Epidemic, which will air during the last week of May. And now let's get outside. Be tick aware, be tick safe. Check yourself, check your friends, but don't be scared. Thanks for joining me today. I'm David Webb, and hey, live the adventure.